Sometimes, the moment you walk away is the moment someone decides they'll never let you go. The rain fell in thin, steady lines, turning the city lights into blurred streaks of gold and white across the pavement. And Emma Carter didn't stop walking, not even when her heels slipped slightly against the slick sidewalk, not even when the cold soaked through her secondhand coat, not even when she heard his voice behind her calling her name. Because if she stopped, even for a second, she knew she might turn around. And she couldn't afford to do that. Not tonight. Not after everything. Her chest tight. Her fingers curled into fists as she pushed through the evening crowd. Strangers brushing past her like she didn't exist. Like none of this mattered. Like her world hadn't just tilted off its axis inside a room filled with chandeliers and champagne she never should have stepped into. The echo of applause still ringing in her ears. The sound of his name. His real name. Spoken into a microphone like it belonged to someone untouchable, someone she never truly knew. Daniel Hayes, CEO of Nexatech, the man she thought fixed apps and laughed too quietly and looked at her like she was the most real thing in the room. The man who never once told her the truth. Emma. Wait. His voice came again. Closer now. Breath uneven. Not the composed tone she remembered. Not the calm, measured man from quiet coffee shops and late afternoon walks. But something raw, something chasing, and she hated that it made her heart stutter. Hated that part of her still recognized it, still wanted to believe it. She shook her head slightly, eyes fixed forward, the city stretching endlessly ahead like an escape she hadn't planned but desperately needed. Because every step away from him felt like pulling herself back together, even if it hurt, even if it felt like leaving something unfinished behind. A cab sped past, splashing water near her feet, and she barely flinched, too caught in the storm inside her mind. Flashes of laughter, of shared stories, of the way he'd leaned in just slightly. When she talked about her dream of opening a small art studio someday, like it mattered, like she mattered, and now, all of it felt staged, like a scene she didn't realize she was acting in, until the curtain dropped and the truth stood center stage in a tailored suit, and a name worth more than everything she owned combined. Emma, please, he said again. And this time his hand caught her wrist, not forceful, just enough to stop her, just enough to make her turn, and for a moment the world seemed to quiet, the traffic fading into a distant hum, the rain softening into a whisper, and there he was, standing in front of her, hair damp, tie loosened, eyes searching hers like he was afraid of what he'd find, or worse, what he wouldn't, and she felt it again, that pull, that dangerous, fragile thread between them. But then the memory hit, the way the room had shifted when his name was announced, the way people looked at him with recognition, admiration, expectation, and the way she had stood there, invisible in a borrowed dress, realizing she had been the only one who didn't know, and something inside her hardened, just enough to take a step back, her voice steady even if her heart wasn't. You should have told me, she said quietly, and the words hung there between them, heavier than the rain, heavier than everything they hadn't said, and for the first time since he started following her, Daniel Hayes didn't have an answer. Daniel's hand slowly fell away from her wrist, not because he wanted to let go, but because he could feel it in the way she looked at him that holding on any tighter would only push her further away. And for a moment he just stood there, rain soaking through his shirt, watching her like he was trying to memorize something that was already slipping out of reach. I was going to tell you, he said finally, his voice quieter now, steadier but still carrying something unguarded beneath it, and Emma let out a soft breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Except there was no humor in it, only disbelief. When, she asked, her eyes searching his face like she was looking for even a single piece of the man she thought she knew. After another coffee? Another walk? Another story about how you work in tech? She repeated his words back to him, the same ones. That once felt harmless now landing with a weight that made her chest tighten, and Daniel shook his head slightly, running a hand through his damp hair as if trying to find the right version of the truth that would not break everything completely. It was not supposed to start like this, he admitted, and that was the part that stung the most, not the lie itself, but how easily it had begun, how naturally he had stepped into a version of himself that did not include the truth. Emma folded her arms across her chest, more to steady herself than to shield against the cold. But it did, she said, her voice softer now, not angry, just tired, And that shift scared him more than anything, because anger meant there was still something to fight for. But this felt like she was already letting go. "You let me believe you were just normal," she continued, the word catching slightly as if she was not sure what it meant anymore. "Do you have any idea what that felt like?" Daniel took a small step closer, careful this time, like approaching something fragile. "Emma, I did not lie about who I am when I was with you," he said, and she looked up at him quickly, a flicker of something crossing her expression. "Then why hide it?" she asked, and for a second, just a second, he hesitated, because the answer was not something he said out loud often, not to investors, not to colleagues, not even to himself. "Because people change when they know," he said quietly. "They see the money first, the company, the title, and everything else comes after, if it comes at all." The rain continued to fall between them, steady and relentless, and Emma felt that familiar pull again, that part of her that understood what he was saying, that had seen glimpses of it even in the way people treated him at the gala. But it did not erase what she felt now. "So you decided for me?" she asked. And that was the question he did not have a clean answer for, the one that sat heavy in. The silence that followed. Cars passed behind them, headlights cutting through the rain, and somewhere in the distance a siren echoed faintly, but neither of them moved. "I thought, if you saw me first," he said, slowly, choosing each word like it mattered. "If you knew me without all of that, then maybe it would be real." Emma swallowed, her throat tight, because it had been real. That was the problem. Every laugh, every quiet moment, every conversation that stretched longer than it should have, none of it had felt fake. And that made this hurt more, not less. She looked down for a moment, rain dripping from her hair onto the pavement, before meeting his eyes again, and this time there was no confusion left in her expression, only clarity that came too late. "It was real to me," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion pressing beneath it. "That is why it matters that you did not trust me with the truth." The words settled between them, heavier than anything she had said before, and Daniel felt them land, felt the distance they created even though they were standing only a few feet apart. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out right away, because for the first time since he started following her, he realized that catching up to her did not mean he knew how to keep her from walking away again. Emma held his gaze for one more second, just long enough to feel everything she needed to let go settle into place. And then she stepped back, not abruptly this time, not running, just a quiet, deliberate step that said more than anything else she could have explained. "I cannot do this right now," she said, her voice calm but distant, and before Daniel could respond, before he could find something, anything, that might reach her, she turned and walked away again, slower this time, but more certain, and he did not grab her wrist, did not call out louder, did not try to stop her with force. He just stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the crowd, as if the city itself was swallowing her whole, and something inside him shifted, something heavier than regret, something closer to realization, because for the first time he understood that following her physically was the easiest part. The real distance was everything he had created between them before tonight even began. Across the street a neon sign flickered above a small diner, casting a soft glow onto the wet pavement, and without thinking he crossed toward it, not because he needed shelter, but because something about it reminded him of her, of the stories she told about late shifts and burnt coffee, and the way she laughed at customers who tried too hard to impress. He stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly, and the warmth hit him immediately, the smell of coffee and syrup and something simple and familiar. And for a moment he just stood there, taking it in like it was a world he had only ever visited through her words. The waitress behind the counter glanced at him briefly before going back to wiping down a table, uninterested in who he was or what he had. And that, more than anything, felt honest. Daniel slid into a booth by the window, rain still tracing lines down the glass beside him, and he reached into his jacket pocket without thinking, his fingers brushing against something soft and worn. He paused, pulling it out slowly, and there it was, Emma's sketchbook, the one she had absent-mindedly left behind earlier that evening when everything had unraveled too fast. He stared at it for a moment, the edges slightly frayed, the cover marked with faint smudges of charcoal, and when he opened it, carefully, like it might break, he found pages filled with sketches that felt alive in a way numbers and contracts never did. Quick lines capturing strangers on buses, a barista mid-laugh, a child chasing pigeons, and then, further in, he saw himself. Not polished, not perfect, just a simple drawing of him sitting across from her at a small table, his expression softer than he had ever seen it. And beneath it, in small handwriting, a single word, real. Daniel let out a slow breath, his chest tightening in a way that had nothing to do with the cold outside. Because this was what she had seen, not the CEO, not the man on magazine covers or behind glass walls in conference rooms, but something quieter, something he had almost forgotten, existed. And now he understood exactly what he had risked losing. Not just her, but that version of himself she had somehow brought out without even trying. The waitress approached, setting a cup of coffee in front of him without asking, the steam rising gently between them, and he nodded in thanks, his attention still on the sketchbook as he turned another page, realizing with a clarity that felt almost painful that if he wanted her to stop walking away, it would not be because he followed her down the street. It would be because he finally learned how to meet her where she was, without hiding, without controlling the story, without deciding for her what she could handle. And for the first time that night, he stopped chasing and started thinking about how to earn his way back. The coffee had gone cold by the time Daniel finally stood up, the city outside no longer blurred by rain, but by something heavier settling behind his eyes. And as he stepped back onto the sidewalk, the night felt different, quieter somehow, like the world had moved forward without him and left him to catch up on his own terms. He looked down once more at the sketchbook in his hands, then carefully closed it, pressing his palm against the worn cover as if grounding himself in something real, something earned, not inherited, not built through contracts or acquisitions, but drawn in simple lines by someone who had believed in what she saw. And that thought stayed with him as he walked, not toward his penthouse, not toward the waiting car that would take him back to glass walls and polished silence, but toward a place he had only visited once, a small apartment tucked above a corner grocery store 3 blocks from the subway, Emma's world, the one she had let him glimpse without hesitation, without pretense. And now he approached it slowly, not as someone who belonged there, but as someone who had to ask for the chance to stand at the door again. The stairwell smelled faintly of detergent and old wood, the narrow steps creaking under his weight as he made his way up, each step echoing louder than it should have, like a reminder that this was not his space to enter without invitation. And when he reached her door, he stopped, his hand hovering just inches from the surface, hesitation settling in, because for the first time in a long time, he did not know what outcome to expect. He was not closing a deal, not negotiating terms, just standing there, hoping. He knocked once, then stepped back slightly, giving her space even before she opened the door. And when she did, a few seconds later, she looked exactly like she had felt all night, tired, guarded, and quietly holding herself together. Her eyes flicked to the sketchbook in his hands before meeting his face again, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the hallway light casting a soft glow between them, not warm, not cold, just there, like the space they now had to bridge. "You forgot this," he said finally, holding it out, his voice steady but softer than it had ever been around her. Emma hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing against his briefly, and the contact, small as it was, carried more weight than either of them acknowledged. She pulled the sketchbook closer to her chest, almost instinctively, like reclaiming something that had always been hers. "Thank you," she said, her tone polite, distant, the kind you use with someone you do not know well. And Daniel nodded once, accepting it, not pushing past it, not trying to force familiarity where it no longer existed. "I read some of it," he admitted, and her expression shifted slightly, not quite defensive, but aware. "You were not supposed to," she replied, and he gave a small, honest nod. "I know," he said, "but I am glad I did." There was no arrogance in his voice, no attempt to justify himself, just a quiet acknowledgement of what he had seen, what he had understood too late. Emma studied him for a moment, searching for something she could not quite name, and when she did not find it immediately, she exhaled softly, her shoulders lowering just a fraction. "You should go," she said, not harshly, not angrily, just simply. And this time, Daniel did not argue. He did not step forward, did not try to change her mind in that moment, because he understood now that this was not something he could fix in a single conversation. "I will," he said, then paused, just long enough to add, "but not like before," and that made her look at him again, just for a second, curiosity flickering beneath the distance. "What does that mean?" she asked, and he met her gaze fully, not hiding, not softening the truth. "It means I am not going to follow you because I am afraid of losing you," he said. "I am going to find a way to deserve you choosing to stay." The words settled quietly between them, not dramatic, not rushed, just real, and Emma did not respond right away, but she did not close the door either, and for the first time since she had walked away, that felt like something worth holding on to. Emma stood there for a few seconds after he finished speaking, the words lingering in the narrow hallway like something fragile that neither of them wanted to break. And for a moment, she almost said something, almost let the part of her that still believed in what they had stepped forward. But then reality settled back in, quiet and firm, and she gave a small nod instead, the kind that did not promise anything but did not reject it either. "Good night, Daniel," she said softly, and this time when she closed the door, it was not rushed, not defensive, just final for now, the click echoing faintly in the hallway as he stood there a second longer than necessary before turning away, walking down the stairs with a steadier pace than before, not because things were fixed, but because for the first time he knew what direction he needed to go. The next morning came without the weight of rain, sunlight stretching across the city in soft gold lines that made everything look a little more forgiving, and Emma sat by the small window in her apartment, sketchbook open in her lap, though she had not drawn a single line, her pencil resting loosely between her fingers as her mind replayed everything from the night before, his voice, his expression, the way he had not tried to force her to forgive him, and that, more than anything, unsettled her because it felt different from what she expected, different from what she had prepared herself to resist. She exhaled slowly, flipping through the pages until she reached the sketch of him again, her eyes tracing the lines she had drawn without thinking too much at the time. And now it felt like looking at someone she had lost, and someone she had never fully known at the same time. Across the city, Daniel stood in front of a glass wall that overlooked the skyline, the kind of view people admired, the kind he had stopped noticing years ago, his reflection faint against the city beyond, suit pressed, posture composed, everything back in place, except for the part of him that no longer fit into that image as easily as it once had. His assistant's voice carried through the open door, listing meetings, deadlines, decisions waiting for him, and he listened, nodded, responded when needed, but his attention kept drifting back to the sketchbook now resting on Emma's small table, to the version of himself she had seen, and to the distance between that man and the one standing here. After the meeting ended, he remained by the window a moment longer, then made a decision that felt less like strategy and more like instinct. "Clear my afternoon," he said, his voice calm but certain. His assistant paused, surprised but professional. "All of it?" she asked, and he nodded once. "All of it," he replied, because for once, the most important thing he had to build was not a deal, not a company, but something far less predictable. Later that day, Emma stepped into the small diner where she worked, tying her apron behind her as the familiar sounds of clinking dishes and quiet conversations filled the space, grounding her in something steady, something she understood. She moved through her shift automatically at first, refilling coffee, taking orders, offering small smiles that did not quite reach her eyes, until the bell above the door chimed, and she looked up without thinking. And there he was, not in a suit this time, not surrounded by attention, just standing there in simple clothes that blended into the room, holding nothing but himself and a quiet determination that felt different from the night before. Emma froze for half a second before forcing herself to keep moving, turning back toward the counter as if she had not noticed, as if ignoring him would make things easier, but she could feel his presence anyway, steady, patient, not approaching immediately, not interrupting her space, just sitting down at a booth like any other customer, waiting, and that, more than anything, made her realize that this time, he was not here to follow her. He was here to meet her where she was, and whether she chose to walk away again or not, this moment would be hers to decide. Emma kept her eyes on the counter, her hands moving automatically as she poured coffee into a chipped white mug, the dark liquid steaming gently in the morning light. but her awareness stayed fixed on him, on the quiet way he sat in that booth like he belonged there without trying to change anything about it. Not drawing attention, not asking for special treatment, just waiting. And that unsettled her more than if he had walked in with confidence and control like the man from the gala, because this version of him did not fit neatly into the anger she had been holding on to. Table 3. Her coworker called out, nudging her lightly, and Emma blinked, realizing she had been standing still for a second too long. She nodded quickly and picked up the mug, along with a small plate, then walked toward him, each step measured, steady, as if she was deciding something with every inch of distance she closed. Daniel looked up when she reached the table, his expression calm but attentive, like he was giving her the space to lead whatever this moment would become, and for a second neither of them spoke, the low hum of the diner filling the silence between them. Emma set the coffee down in front of him, her fingers brushing the edge of the table before she pulled her hand back. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice professional, neutral, the kind she used with every customer, and Daniel gave a small, almost understanding nod, accepting the boundary she had drawn without pushing against it. "Just coffee," he said, his tone just as even, as if they were strangers sharing a simple exchange, and she nodded once, writing it down even though there was nothing to write, a small habit that grounded her, then turned to leave. But before she could take a full step away, he spoke again, not louder, not urgent, just enough for her to hear. "I am not here to interrupt your day," he said, and that made her pause, just slightly, her back still turned to him. "Then why are you here?" she asked without looking back, and there was a brief silence before he answered, as if he was choosing honesty over ease. "Because I realized something last night," he said. "I kept following you because I thought if I stayed close enough, I could fix what I broke, but that was not fair to you." Emma slowly turned back toward him, her expression guarded but curious despite herself. "And now?" she asked, and Daniel leaned forward slightly, resting his hands loosely on the table, not reaching for her, not closing the distance, just present. "Now I understand that you deserve to decide if I get to be part of your life at all," he said. "So I am not going to chase you, and I am not going to disappear either." The words settled into the space between them, simple but deliberate, and Emma studied him carefully, searching for the familiar signs of control, of someone used to getting what he wanted, but what she saw instead was patience, something quieter, something that did not demand anything from her, and that made her chest tighten in a different way. "You think sitting here changes anything?" she asked, her voice softer now, less defensive, more uncertain, and Daniel shook his head slightly, a faint, almost self-aware smile touching his lips. "No," he admitted, "but I thought maybe showing up honestly might matter more than explaining myself again." Emma let out a small breath, glancing around the diner, at the regular customers, the worn booths, the life she understood, and then back at him, sitting there in the middle of it without trying to reshape it. And for the first time since the truth came out, she did not feel like she was standing on opposite sides of something impossible, just two people in the same space, figuring out what came next. She shifted her weight slightly, still holding on to her role, her boundaries, but not walking away this time. "Coffee is on the house," she said quietly, and it was a small thing, barely noticeable to anyone else, but to Daniel, it felt like the first step she had not taken away from him. The small exchange lingered longer than either of them expected, not because of what was said, but because of what was not, and Emma turned away again. But this time it was not to escape. It was to return to her rhythm, to the steady pace of orders and refills and quiet conversations that grounded her. Yet something had shifted, subtle but undeniable. She found herself glancing toward table 3 more often than she intended, noticing the way Daniel did not reach for his phone, did not check the time, did not behave like someone waiting for something better to happen. He simply sat there, occasionally sipping his coffee, his attention moving around the diner like he was learning it, understanding it, not as an outsider, but as someone trying to belong without forcing his way in. And that, more than anything, unsettled the certainty she had been holding on to. Hours passed in small increments. The lunch rush came and went, the sound of plates and voices rising and falling like waves. And through it all, he stayed, not intruding, not asking for more than what she had already given. And when her shift finally slowed, when the last of The regular customers drifted out and the afternoon light softened through the windows. Emma found herself standing at the counter with nothing immediate to do, her fingers tracing absent patterns on the surface, her mind quieter than it had been in days. She looked up again, and he was still there, but now his cup was empty, his posture unchanged, patient in a way that did not feel strategic, just real. She hesitated, then picked up the coffee pot and walked over again, this time without being called, without needing a reason beyond the one she was still trying to understand. "Refill?" she asked, her voice softer now, less guarded, and Daniel looked up, meeting her eyes with a small nod. "Only if you are staying for a minute," he replied, not as a condition, but as an invitation, and she paused, just briefly, before setting the pot down and sliding into the seat across from him, the movement surprising even herself, because it was not something she had planned, it was something she chose, and that difference mattered more than she wanted to admit. For a moment neither of them spoke, the quiet of the diner settling around them, no longer filled with distractions, just the low hum of a refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. Emma rested her hands lightly on the table, her eyes dropping to the surface before lifting again. "You stayed," she said, and it was not a question, more like an observation she was still processing. Daniel nodded once. "I said I would not disappear," he replied, and she studied him for a second, as if weighing that against everything she knew about him now. "Most people would have left," she said, and he gave a faint, almost thoughtful smile. "Most people are used to being needed somewhere else," he answered. "Today, I needed to be here." The honesty in that statement did not feel rehearsed, did not feel like something crafted to win her over, and Emma felt her defenses shift again, not falling completely, but no longer as rigid as before. She leaned back slightly, exhaling. "You make it sound simple," she said, and he shook his head. "It is not," he admitted, "but I am learning that simple and easy are not the same thing." She let that sit for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the window, where the afternoon light stretched across the sidewalk, familiar and steady, and then back to him, sitting across from her not as a CEO, not as someone above her world, but as someone choosing to meet it without changing it. And for the first time since everything unraveled, she did not feel like she had to walk away to protect herself. She just sat there, in the quiet space between who they were and who they might become, realizing that maybe the next step was not about running or chasing at all, but about staying long enough to see what was real. The quiet between them did not feel empty anymore. It felt deliberate, like both of them were choosing not to rush into something they did not yet understand. And Emma found herself studying Daniel in a way she had not allowed herself to before, not as the man who had hidden the truth, but as the man sitting across from her now, present, patient, and unexpectedly still. Her fingers traced the rim of the coffee cup in front of her, the warmth grounding her as she searched for something honest to say. "I do not know what this is supposed to be now," she admitted, her voice softer than it had been all day, and Daniel did not answer right away. Not because he did not have words, but because he understood that rushing to define something fragile could break it. "It does not have to be anything yet," he said finally, his tone calm, steady. "It just has to be real." And that word lingered between them again, echoing what she had once written without knowing how much it would matter. Emma looked down for a moment, a faint, almost reluctant smile touching her lips, before fading again. "You keep saying that," she said, and he gave a small nod. "Because it is the only thing I did not give you from the beginning," he replied, and there was no defense in his voice, no attempt to soften the truth, just acceptance, and that made something in her shift, not completely, not all at once, but enough for her to feel it. The wall she had built after the gala no longer felt solid, just necessary at the time. She leaned back slightly, exhaling as she looked toward the window again. The afternoon now drifting into early evening, the light outside softer, warmer, familiar in a way that made everything feel less overwhelming. "You really stayed here all day," she said, almost to herself, and Daniel followed her gaze briefly before looking back at her. "I told you, I needed to be here," he said, and this time she believed him, not because of what he said, but because of what he had done. The hours he had spent without asking for anything in return, without trying to control the outcome, just showing up in the only way she had left him space to. Emma hesitated, then reached into the pocket of her apron. Pulling out a folded receipt, she smoothed it against the table, her movements slow, thoughtful. "I was supposed to use this," she said, glancing at it briefly before meeting his eyes again. "It is from an art supply store, a few blocks from here. I have been saving up for weeks to buy better materials." She paused, her fingers tightening slightly around the paper. "I almost went this morning, but I could not focus." Daniel listened without interrupting, his attention steady, giving her the space to say what she needed to. "I do not want things to feel uneven," she continued, choosing her words carefully. "I do not want you to fix my life or make everything easier just because you can." And he nodded immediately, understanding the weight behind that. "I am not here to do that," he said. "I am here to be part of whatever you choose to build, not to replace it." Emma held his gaze for a second longer, searching for anything that might contradict that. And when she did not find it, she exhaled slowly, then slid the receipt back into her pocket. Not as something she was giving up, but as something she was still holding on to for herself. She stood then, the movement unhurried, and Daniel followed her with his eyes but did not stand, did not assume, did not push. "My shift ends in 10 minutes, she said, her voice steady. "If you are still here," she paused, just briefly, "we can take a walk." The words were simple, almost casual, but they carried more meaning than anything else she had said since the truth came out. And for the first time, it was not him following her, it was her deciding not to walk away. Daniel stayed exactly where he was after she walked away, not checking the time, not second-guessing whether she would come back, just sitting there with a quiet certainty that felt different from anything he had relied on before. And when the minutes passed, each one slower than the last, he realized that for the first time, he was not trying to control the outcome. He was simply waiting to see if she would choose him. The diner door opened and closed a few times, the light outside shifting into the soft glow of early evening. And then finally she appeared again, no apron this time. Her hair slightly loosened, her expression calmer, not fully open, but no longer guarded the same way it had been, and she did not hesitate when she walked toward him. "You are still here," she said, a faint hint of something lighter in her voice. And he stood then, meeting her at eye level. "I told you I would be," he replied, and she nodded once, as if confirming something to herself rather than to him. They stepped outside together, the air cooler now, the city alive in a quieter way, the rush of the day settling into something more reflective, and for a while they walked without speaking, side by side, not touching, not rushing, just moving forward at the same pace, their footsteps falling into an easy rhythm that felt familiar despite everything that had changed. "This is where I usually come after work," Emma said eventually, gesturing toward a small park just ahead. The kind with worn benches and soft grass that had seen years of quiet conversations and passing moments. And Daniel nodded, taking it. And not as a place to impress or evaluate, but as something she had chosen, something that mattered to her. They reached a bench and sat down, leaving a small space between them, not distant, just respectful. Emma leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees as she looked out at the open space. A few people passing by, a dog chasing something unseen, life continuing in simple, steady ways. "When I first met you," she said slowly, "I thought you were just someone I could talk to." Without thinking too much, she paused, glancing at him briefly before looking forward again. "Someone who did not come with expectations." Daniel listened, his expression steady, not interrupting. "And then I found out you came with more than I could even understand," she continued, her voice thoughtful rather than bitter. "And it made me feel like everything I felt before was misplaced." He took a quiet breath, choosing his words carefully. "It was not misplaced," he said. "It was based on what was real between us, even if I did not show you all of it." She turned slightly toward him at that, studying his face as if measuring the weight of what he said. "That is the part one am still trying to figure out," she admitted. "What was real and what was not." Daniel met her gaze fully, no hesitation this time. "Then let me show you," he said, not as a promise he expected her to accept immediately, but as an offer he was willing to stand behind. Emma held his eyes for a second longer, then looked away again, her expression softer now, more thoughtful than defensive, and after a moment, she shifted slightly closer, not enough to close the space completely, but enough to change it, too. Acknowledge that something was rebuilding, slowly, carefully. We can start with something simple, she said quietly. No titles, no expectations, no pretending. Daniel nodded once, a small but certain gesture. Just us, he replied. And this time, when they sat in silence again, it did not feel unsafe.